Below it was a weed-covered pond, a thing, incidentally, which is no rarity in the English gardens of Russian landowners. At the foot of the hill and along part of the slope itself stood some dingy, grayish log huts, which Chichikov at once started to count for some reason. He counted more than 200. Nowhere among them was there even a sprig of anything green growing. One could see nothing but the logs of the huts. The view was enlivened by two peasant women who, with their skirts picturesquely gathered up and tucked in all around, were wading up to their knees in the pond, dragging a torn net by two wooden grapples. In the net there were two entangled crayfish and a shiny roach. The women were quarreling, shouting at each other. Farther away, a dark pine forest showed gloomily bluish. Even the weather fitted the picture. The day was neither bright nor rainy, but a sort of pale gray, such as is only seen in the old uniforms of garrison soldiers. A peaceful lot, incidentally, but not always very sober on Sundays. To make the picture complete, there was the usual rooster. Although his head had been pecked through almost to the very brain by the beaks of other roosters over certain matters of gallantry, this herald of changeable weather was crowing loudly and even flapping his wings, which were as tattered as old straw matting. As they neared the house, Chichikov made out the green-coated master himself, standing on the porch and shielding his eyes with his hand so as to see the approaching carriage better. The closer the carriage came to the porch, the more merrily his eyes sparkled, and the wider grew his smile. "My dear friend," he exclaimed, as Chichikov at last stepped out of the carriage. "So you remembered us after all." The friends embraced warmly, and Manilov led his guest inside. Although it won't take them long to cross the entrance hall and go through the dining room, we'll try to say something here about the master of the house. But it must be confessed that this is a difficult undertaking. It is much easier to paint a character of grand dimensions. You just have to splash the colors onto the canvas. Fiery black eyes, beetling brows, a furrowed forehead, a cloak, black or flame red, flung over the shoulder, and there you have it. But gentlemen like Manilov, of whom the world is full, who look very much alike, but on a second look turn out to have many very subtle peculiarities, these are terribly difficult to portray. You have to concentrate hard to bring out all the fine, almost imperceptible traits, and in general, you have to pry very deep, however practiced an observer you may be. Perhaps God alone could tell what Manilov was like. There's a kind of person who can be described as just so-so, neither fish nor fowl, and perhaps Manilov should be placed in this group. He was certainly personable to look at. His face was amiable. But this amiability was rather too sugary. In his manner and speech, there was something obviously intended to gain favor and friendship. He had an ingratiating smile, blonde hair, and blue eyes. When you first got into conversation with him, you couldn't help saying, "What a nice, kind person." Later, you wouldn't say anything. And after that, you'd say, "Damned if I know what it's all about," and get away from him. Or if you failed to do so, you'd succumb to deadly boredom. He never uttered a word indicating that he really felt anything, even anger, which, after all, almost anyone will show if you touch on a sore spot. Everyone has his pet enthusiasm. One may be enthusiastic about hounds. Another fancies himself a great connoisseur of music, able to appreciate its profoundest passages. A third is a great gourmet. A fourth insists that his position is more important, if only a tiny bit, than it really is. A fifth's dreams are confined to being seen in the company of an aide-de-camp by his friends and acquaintances, and even by people he doesn't know. A sixth may have a hand that itches to place a bet on the ace or the two of diamonds, while the seventh's hand tends to fly out to punish some station master or coachman. In a word, everyone has his own peculiarity, whereas Manilov had none. At home, he spoke little and spent most of his time in thought and contemplation, but God alone knows what he thought about. It can hardly be said that he ran his estate. He never even drove out to the fields. The estate somehow took care of itself. When his manager said, "Wouldn't it be a good idea to do this or that, sir?" he'd answer, "Yes, not bad," and puff away at his pipe, a habit he had acquired while in the army, where he was considered the most self-effacing, the most tactful, the most cultured of officers. "Yes, indeed, not a bad idea at all," he would repeat. When a peasant came to him, scratching the back of his head, and said, "Allow me, sir, to go and earn some money to pay my taxes," he'd say, "Go ahead," still puffing at his pipe. And it never occurred to him that the peasant just wanted to go off and get drunk. Sometimes, surveying the yard and the pond from the porch, he would muse aloud about how nice it would be to dig an underground passage from the house, or to build a stone bridge across the pond with little stores on either side of it, and to have merchants sitting in them and selling various small items to the peasants. Then his eyes would grow soft and his face would take on a most contented expression. However, all these projects ended there. In his study, there was a book with a bookmark in it at page 14. A book he had been reading constantly for 2 years. There was always something missing in his house. His drawing room furniture was excellent. It was upholstered in a costly silken material, but it had turned out that there wasn't enough of it for 2 of the armchairs, so they stood there covered with sackcloth. For several years now, the master of the house had been warning his guests, "Don't sit in those chairs, please, they're not yet ready.